Hello. Uh, is my voice is audible for everyone? The people who are attending. Hello. Surendra, can you hear my voice, Surendra? Manoj or anyone else? Is the voice is audible? Hello. Uh, is the voice is audible, Surendra? Suresh, Chandrakant. Okay, we will start the webinar shortly in another 5 minutes maximum, so that if anyone wants to join, they can just attend it. Is the screen is visible? Okay, Sai, like is the screen is visible? I just opened visualstudio.net and I just typed a message. We will start the webinar shortly in another 5 minutes. Okay, just 3 to 4 minutes. We'll try to start with our session. And we will try to put a questionnaire at the end of the session so that we will not have any kind of problem in understanding this thing. Meanwhile, if you wanted to post any questions, you can just post in the question part so that I can just provide the response also. It's better to, like, if the page is not showing anything, like say if it is not showing visualstudio.net, then it's better to reload the page. Manoj, is your screen has been reshared properly? Okay. Now let's try to start with the session. So the agenda for this particular webinar, okay, the agenda for this webinar is to provide a clear introduction on some of the new features that are introduced in C Sharp 6.0. So to start with this thing, let me just try to specify how the session goes on. Like you can just try to understand this is a simple webinar for exploring all the concepts of C Sharp 6.0 with some demos. And also, once this particular demo is done or the webinar is completed, whatever the notes I type in and whatever the programs I develop, these things you can download from my website by tomorrow by this time. Okay, so to start with this, a brief history, if I just wanted to provide, C Sharp 1.0 has been introduced in 2002 with all the basic stuff what is required for a programming language. And then we got C Sharp 2.0, which got introduced in 2005. And when we try to understand C Sharp 2.0, the best features what we have in C Sharp 2.0 is a concept called as generics. Generics is a concept which made a huge revolution in C Sharp. Almost any program we tried to do at that time, we started using generics. But in 1.0, we used to work without generics itself. Later, we got C Sharp 3.0 in 2007, and we got lots of new features introduced in C Sharp 3.0, something like object initializers, collection initializers. I just make a room for the typing. We got something like collection initializer, auto properties or automatic properties, lambda expression. Almost most of the programs what we try to do from C Sharp 3.0, hardly I don't write anything without using lambda expressions also. So most of the features what we had is we got some kind of things, but these concepts were not available earlier but used to work with it. So when we got this new features introduced, the advantage what we had is the coding complexity got reduced day by day. And when we had C Sharp 4.0, which got introduced in 2010, we had a new feature introduced for us called as dynamic. And uh, even though the dynamic was available, like say at the runtime, if we try to provide the values, if it can able to match with that, then automatically we can able to get the things done. Later, we got C Sharp 5.0 in 2012, where one of the most powerful feature which got introduced for us, that is called as asynchronous programming. So almost any program these days, we try to depend on this asynchronous programming model only. so that we can able to achieve a very efficient performance. In case if you have any kind of problems in understanding asynchronous programming, you can just watch my YouTube video. There is almost 40-minute session on asynchronous programming of C Sharp 5.0, how to work with the async and await concepts that got introduced in 5.0, and how it has to be used in the previous versions. Now, our main agenda is going to be understanding some of the new features that will be available on C Sharp 6.0. As an early birds, we'll try to understand what are going to be coming in this version, how this is going to reduce the code to the maximum extent. Okay, now let's try to start exploring the new features introduced in C Sharp 6.0. Okay, if anyone wants to raise your questions, you can always use the question panel for asking the questions. Okay, now let's try to start with the very first feature that has been introduced and very popularly available. The feature called as auto property initializers. So automatic property is a concept which was available from C Sharp 3.0 to define a read and write properties. Instead of going for a full property definition by providing a backing up field, we can define this. From C Sharp 6.0, we got this feature. So what does this particular concept means? It is the ability to use an initialization expression with an automatically implemented property. So in the older versions, what we try to do was when we wanted to achieve this kind of task, so we will try to define some properties, and that particular property we will try to set the values with the support of some kind of constructors. Okay, say the syntax for this particular thing, if I wanted to handle it, it's quite simple. We simply use a modifier public and the data type to be used, property name. We try to simply specify the getter, and we don't have to explicitly specify the setter, and I can just directly specify the value. So in the previous versions, what we used to do was, this is not the way we try to do it. Okay, so let's try to understand this with a very simple example, how we can able to work with this. Let me just try to add a simple class where I call it as auto property initializer demo. Now let us try to first understand, before we used to work with the C Sharp 6.0 till C Sharp 5.0, okay, till 5.0, we used to follow one particular pattern. Okay, the questions, whatever you're typing, I will try to check it out at the end of the webinar. I will try to clarify every questions. Okay, Manoj as well as Chandrakant. Okay, now let's say that I would like to have a class. Let's assume that before C Sharp 6.0. Now the current versions what we are trying to do. But I try to define a class. Okay, I would like to have a class that's available for us. Once I have a class, okay, once we have a class that is available, I can say the name of the class is sample. I try to define some private variable. So anytime we try to define it, we'll try to define some private variable. And let's assume that I put a variable called as grid. A grid is used to provide a unique identifiers. So anytime you wanted to have some variable or some particular property always with a unique value, then the best thing that what we can do was take the support of grid. Many people, what they do was, in order to dynamically generate unique values, they try to take the support of a date and time. They try to trim off the colons and the spaces that are available in between the date time, and they try to combine the entire date time into one single value, and that value they try to assign it. But the best thing that what you can do is, whenever you have a requirement, okay, whenever we have a requirement such that we wanted to assign a unique values, then we can take the support of grid. So I simply now say a constructor, because private variables you cannot access it outside. So I say public. I take the support of a constructor, and within this constructor what I try to do is I say this dot underscore id. I'll try to assign some particular new value. Let's say uh, a new git value I'm trying to assign it. So before C sharp, what we used to do is we define a private variable, and then we'll try to take a constructor. With the support of constructor, we will try to assign the value. And once I assign the value, to return this information, we take the support of a public property with the getter, and I can simply say return this dot underscore id. Okay, so in this way what we can do is we can take the support of a property with a getter which can return that particular value for us. This is how we used to do before C sharp 6.0. Now say that I just wanted to rewrite this particular code with the support of C sharp 6.0 using a concept called as auto property initializers. Now what I can do is I can simply say using C sharp 6.0 auto property initializers. We can take a class new sample. Once I just provided this thing, now what I can do is here I defined a private variable, then a constructor, and then a read-only property. So this entire lines of code, now we can just reduce by saying public, the type is grid, the property name is id, a getter equal to grid dot new git. That's it. So once we done with this particular thing, automatically the meaning of this is going to become this thing. So we can just try to understand with the support of auto property initializer how much code has been reduced. So from the 6.0 version onwards, whenever we used to write the programs, we can take the support of these concepts and we can handle it. Like earlier, the auto property concept itself has reduced lot of coding. So earlier, what we used to do was, in case if I have to write something like this was a assume that if I wanted to write it, the full name with the support of auto property initializer, we could have reduced this particular thing by simply specifying in one line. Okay, so this was the way we used to write it in C Sharp 2.0, which has been modified in C Sharp 3.0 like this. Now, with the support of 6.0, what happened is we have a new set of coding style like this. Hope you are clear with the first feature which I explained, that is called as auto property initializers. Okay, no, you cannot Venkatesh, you cannot assign any kind of things like this. Okay, and let me just slightly quickly check out the questions and so that I can able to answer. So you are saying that grid cannot be duplicated. Yes, Manoj, grid can never be duplicated. No, Venkatesh, the code what we write it in C Sharp 6.0 using 6.0 feature, that code we cannot write it in 5.0. Okay, but the features concepts of like most of the features are available in 5.0 also. All that can be used in 6.0 as well. Okay, now once we are clear with this, now let's try to understand the next feature that is introduced in C Sharp 6.0. Hope everyone is clear with the first concept. Now let's try to understand the next feature that we have here, that is called as primary constructors. Okay, one particular thing we have to understand in 6.0 version is, so lots of debates are been going on in this particular language with respect to the features. One of the debate that has been happening on C Sharp 6.0 is on a concept called as primary constructors. Whether to keep this particular concept in the final version of C Sharp, or whether we should not keep this particular concept. But this particular feature is already available. Okay, this particular feature is already available in some new programming languages like F Sharp, in a language like Scala, in a language like Kotlin, etc. In C Sharp 6.0, we are getting this concept as a new feature. Okay, so okay, so we have some particular thing called as this. So primary constructors is one such concept, as I informed that. Okay, primary constructor is one such concept that has been introduced, that whether to keep or not, and this is in an experimental phase, but hopefully this concept will be available. So let's try to understand what is this particular concept, and what is this particular things works. Okay, but before this, I'm getting some questions here. So can sir, can you tell me briefly about grid and what it returns? That question has been posted by, I don't remember, name is not displayed. Okay, before I continue, uh, grid is a global unique identifier which returns a string. Almost it's a 16 digit, 16 character string it will try to return for us. Okay, and How does the property initializer works with static classes and static properties? I'll try to explain. Like static, there is a lot of enhancement that has been added, Vijendra. That particular thing I'll try to explain you shortly. Okay. Okay. So now let me just try to explain what is a primary constructors concept. A primary constructor allows us to define a constructor for a type and capture the constructor parameters to use in the initialization expressions throughout the rest of the type definition. Okay, so now let's try to observe this particular thing. So whenever we try to observe it, the syntax for working with the primary constructor is we will have a class name, and we can just pass the parameters when we try to define this particular class, and whatever the members or statements that we have to write it, those members or statements we can just have it. Okay, so this is the syntax for the primary constructor. So when we try to work with the primary constructors, this is the syntax what we just got it. Okay, now let us try to first understand how this was to be useful, or before we go with the primary constructors, let us try to understand. Okay, we'll try to understand how we used to work before C# 6.0 and how this particular concept has been enhanced in 6.0. Okay, so to start with this, let me just try to add a simple class where I try to give a name called as primary constructors. I just put something like demo on primary constructors. Okay, so to start with this, let's assume that I would like to have, I put this as a sub namespace. Let us assume that I would like to have a class with the name called as department. And we know that from C# 6.0 onward, or C# prior to C# 3.0 onwards, we have been introduced with the automatic properties. So when we have an automatic properties got introduced for us, we have a support like, say, I would like to have some department number, I would like to have a department name, and also I would like to have a location. So instead of going for a full post pack, what we can do, like say, instead of defining a full property, with the support of automatic properties, we can able to handle this thing. Okay, now what we can do is, once I define this particular properties, we'll try to take a instance constructor or a non-static constructor which takes some parameters, and this particular information can be assigned. So I can say this dot department number equal to DNO, this dot DNAME equal to DNAME, this dot location equal to location. So in this way, what we can do is we can take the support of Okay, we can take the support of a class with some properties, and we can take the non-static constructor and initialize this values. Okay, so this is how we used to do this thing. Okay, so you will see that particular syntax, Manoj. Okay, so this is before C sharp 6.0. Now the same thing if I wanted to write with C sharp 6.0. Okay, so what we can do is using C sharp 6.0 primary constructor. So to work with this, what I can do is I can simply say a class department. I say new department, for example, so that we can understand this. So class new department, and in this particular thing, I take some parameters int dno, string dname, and string location. So while defining this particular class, what I'm trying to do now is we have this thing. Okay, so class department. Now what I'm trying to do is whatever the values that you're going to pass for the constructor, while defining the class itself, we are trying to pass this particular thing. Okay, now what I can do is already we discussed auto property initializer. So let's try to write this particular program with the support of that itself. Now what I can do is I can simply say public int department number. Auto property will have a getter equal to dno. Likewise, I say dname. Okay, so public string dname, I just have it. Public string location getter equal to the location. You can just try to specify this thing. Okay, so I can simply mention public in department number and this. The code what we used to write in this way, this particular code now when we just try to use C sharp 6.0, it gets reduced like this. But this particular concept isn't okay. This particular concept is in having some kind of controversies, and some people wanted to remove this particular concept, and many people wanted to have this particular concept. So we are not sure whether this particular feature will be available or not. It is in the experimental thing. Okay, since it is in experimental phase, okay, since it is in an experimental phase that is available, so what we try to do is, in order to work with this particular example, we have to make this particular project as a experimental. That is, we have to open to work with the experimental features. You need to add the following line of code should be added within the C Sharp project file. So what is the line of code that we have to add is lang version experimental. Okay, lang version, we have to specify it as experimental. So how do I do this particular thing means, the most easiest way that you can just do is right click on the application present within the solution explorer, and once we have this particular thing, okay, once we have this thing, just open the folder in file explorer. You can just find our visual c sharp project file. So what you can do is right click on the project file, open with the notepad, and before we close the property group, we have to add one additional line of code called as lang version experimental, and we have to close this. This is something that we have to add it. Okay, this is something which we need to add. Okay, once this particular thing has been done, you can save this. Make sure that you close your Visual Studio.net, and next time when you try to open that, you try to open the project file, so that it will try to open your C# project with the language version as experimental. If this particular line has been removed, then the primary constructors concept will not work for us. Okay, so hope you are clear with this particular thing. So if you have any kind of queries on this, you can just ask me so that I can just clarify your queries. Okay, so once we know a concept called as a primary constructors concept. Okay, once we have a concept called as a primary constructor concept, the next thing we need to understand is, if a class consists of a primary constructor like this, and if I wanted to use some kind of explicit constructors, then how do I use an explicit constructors while working with the primary constructor? So let's try to understand this thing. Okay, so there are certain points that we have to understand here. So using explicit constructors while using the primary constructors in C# 6.0. So to understand this particular thing, let me just try to one quick question that has been asked for me. Uh, I have missed out primary constructor. Yes, I will try to do that thing. And can we create overloaded constructor in the class if defined with? Yes, that's what I'm trying to going to explain now. And if you use primary constructor, this will show it. Yes, this will give you an error if you are trying to use this particular thing in 5.0. Even in 6.0, primary constructors will give you an error. Okay, until or unless you try to specify the language version as experimental. Okay, so now is it possible to create an empty constructor if we created a class using primary constructor? Um so the only there is one small difference that we have to understand, Venkatesh. That is, when you try to use the datetime and the property get and set, the one which I just shown you earlier, the automatic properties, the one which I shown you something like this. You will have a get and setter in the constructor, you will try to set it and do this thing. But whereas here we will try to do it directly. You don't need things that has to be done in your auto property concept of C sharp. We don't have initialization of that particular thing which has been introduced here. Okay, now let's try to understand this particular thing. Any other new questions came? Okay, now let us try to observe it. Like when we just have this particular thing. Okay, so already we have a primary constructor now, and in this particular primary constructor, one quick question that has been came: if I have a class with primary constructor, then what do I call it as? You have to call it as primary constructor. Remember this always, you can never create a default constructor. If a constructor is created, then it is not a default constructor. Okay, if the constructor is not accepting any arguments, then it is called as zero argument constructors. I hope we will getting distracted from our time. Thank you, sir. Sure, it will be better also. I think so. Like say the questionnaire, I will try to clear at the end. Okay, that will be better. So now let me just try to go with this thing. Like when we have something like explicit constructors that has been defined, then what we have to observe is, say for example, I try to define a zero argument constructor. So I say public department. As soon as I try to define this thing, I just observe it, I get an error. Okay, so we can observe that we got an error. Now, when I just try to hover the mouse on this particular thing, sorry. Okay. Now, when I just try to hover the mouse on this particular thing, it shows me error saying that since this type has a primary constructors, all instance constructor declarations must specify a constructor initializer for this form. Okay, please make your questions prepared, and at the end of the session we'll try to put a question here thing so that it will not distract the things. Okay, so I try to specify this thing. This is the problem we have it. I have a primary constructor, and when I try to define a constructor explicitly, we are getting this thing. So the point that we have to understand in this case is, once we have a primary constructor for a class, then all the other constructors should be in the format of primary constructor only. Is it clear this? So if we have one primary constructor for a class, then all other constructors should be in the format of primary constructor only. We always want the primary constructor arguments to be available for initialization, although the struct may have its non-replaceable zero argument constructor that will initialize all members with the relevant default values. But when we work with the class, then it should be in the format of primary constructor only. Okay, so what is the meaning of this particular statement is, say for example, I am not able to create a constructor which is taking a zero argument. If I take one parameter, even then it will not allow you to do something like this. Okay, so you don't when we have this particular thing that's available, we have to understand that this should be exactly similar to that of a primary constructor. But now what is happening is, this is taking one department number, but my primary constructor is taking department number, department name, as well as locations. Okay, so now what we can do here in this particular cases, okay, now what we can do in this particular cases, if I wanted to satisfy this thing, Okay, if I wanted to satisfy this thing, then what we will do is public the constructor, the parameter that has to be passed. Along with this, I should use a keyword called as this, and you have to specify the parameter name and what are the default values that you wanted to assign it. Once I done with this, let's say that I would like to have something like class primary construct, or I can say demo directly. And I would like to have a main method. Let me create an object for the department. It's a new department, right? So let me create an object for the new department D1. Now you can just try to observe it. We have overloaded constructors. One constructor is taking department number alone, and another one is taking department number, department name, and location. But if you just try to observe one thing, we have just passed only department number, and then I have a this, and I'm trying to set this particular values. Now I try to pass some department number 10. I just created an object for this particular new department using a constructor which was taking only one value. Okay, that is your department number. Now what I can do is I can say department 20, something like training, location, Hyderabad. Okay, so once we have this particular detail, so new department and this thing. Okay, so once we have this particular thing, now let me just try to quickly thing D1. I wanted to display the values of department number, department name, and location. So I can say D1 dot department number, D1 dot department name, and D1 dot location. Likewise, I try to specify D2, D2 dot department number, department name, and the location. Now let me just try to quickly make this as a startup project, and let's try to execute this. Oops, maybe some error. Okay, no issues. So we can just try to observe it. Department 1 has been created with a constructor that is taking department number. So the department name and location, we got it as a empty string. And department 2 is created with the support of primary constructor, which was trying to take department number, department name, and location. Okay, now let's try to understand the next feature that has been introduced in C Sharp 6.0, that's called as concept called as dictionary initializer. And before I go with the dictionary initializer, let me just try to put some small notes on the things what we discussed in the explicit constructor, so that when you try to download this particular material from my website, you'll have all the points remembered. Okay, uh, so the note we have to remember is, once we have a primary constructor or a class, then all other constructors should be in the format of primary constructors only. We always want the primary constructor arguments to be available for initialization. Okay, for initialization. So this is the points that we have to understand in this. The syntax to define an explicit constructor while using primary constructors. We may have some particular thing, public class name, some argument information. This argument name and default value. So this is how you're going to define explicit constructor when we try to work with this thing. Okay. Okay. The next thing that we would like to, the questions I will try to answer at the end of this particular webinar so that no one gets distracted at any time. Okay. And let's try to make it quick with the features that are available so that I hope everyone can understand these things. The next concept that has been introduced for us in C# 6.0 is called as a concept with the name dictionary initialization. From C# 3.0 onwards, we have been introduced with a new concept called as collection initializers. So collection initializers are used for initializing the collections. Now from C# 6.0 onwards, we have been introduced with a concept called as dictionary initializers. Okay, so for example, it is used to initialize the dictionary. Whenever we wanted to initialize the dictionary objects, then we take the support of this thing. Okay, so let's try to first understand how we used to do in the earlier versions and how it's going to work in the latest versions. For example, just to understand this thing, to make it fast, let me type it here. Let's say I have a class user which is having some variable like say username, get and setter. So this is before C# 6.0. So once we have this particular thing, I would like to have a constructor. So I will say public user string some uname. And what we try to do is this dot username equal to uname. Within the constructor, which takes a single arguments, we will try to set this particular thing. Okay, so once we have this information that's available for us, now what I may try to do is, let's say for example, assume that I have a class with the name called as demo, which takes a main method. I can say, for example, assume that it's a main method. Once we have a main method that's available, if I wanted to have a dictionary object, I can simply say dictionary some string. That's your key value pair that we will be having it. And we need to have the user. So I can say users equal to, we can simply say dictionary of string comma user. Once we have this particular thing, what we can do in the previous version is, we can just put a name and value pairs. Like say I say admin, that's a key. The value I can simply say is a new user, and I take a constructor which is taking a parameter like say for example Shaker. Guest is the key. I say new user Srinivasan. So in this way we can able to do it. So when we try to do in this particular thing, what my system internally does is it will try to you create internally C# compiler generates the following type of code. So when we use this particular thing, like say I'm using the previous style of handling it, dictionary string user users. Like say it's a key value pair. So we have this, the key name is admin, and the value what we have provided is this thing. So when we try to specify in this particular way, then what happens is this is going to generate the code like this. Dictionary string the user, users equal to dictionary string user. It first creates an object, and then what it will try to do is users dot add of admin comma new user of Shaker. Users dot add of guest new user Srinivasan. So in this way, it will try to generate the code for us. Okay, in this particular way, it is going to be generating for us. Whereas this particular concept, C sharp using C sharp 6.0 dictionary okay, using C sharp 6.0 dictionary initializer. The same code, what we can do is we can just write it in this way. Dictionary string user, users equal to new dictionary string comma user. And once we specified this particular thing, then what we can do is we can just open a brackets, and the key we can just specify equal to new user of like this. So this is going to use an indexer type of syntax for handling this thing. If you just try to observe the code what we used to write earlier, there is no much difference in these two code. Almost both are same. Almost even the number of characters, if more or less it is same only. Okay, so more or less it's going to be same for us. Here I have to explicitly specify that particular information what we have to do it here. Okay, so whenever we wanted to have this particular things, so a small correction, uh, have to specify the parameters. Okay, so more or less the number of characters also is going to be same. Okay, so in this way what we try to do is we'll try to work with, but when it comes to the performance there is no differentiation that you will try to get it. When it comes to the concept of coding, almost equal characters you will be finding it. The only difference is here you will be using a flower brackets at the before and end. Here you're going to use a square brackets before the key. Okay, so the thing what we will try to do is, it's the advantage of dictionary initializer means the only advantage as of now I can observe is it is going to provide more clarity when we try to observe it. And there is a small difference in the way the C sharp compiler generates the code. In the next webinar, when I try to discuss, I will try to explain on how a compiler compiles our code and how we can write our own compiler instructions generated as so. Okay, with the support of Rosalind. Now, if this is the code that we have written, what it will try to do is, it will first create an object for the dictionary, and once it creates an object for the dictionary, it will say users of admin equal to new user of Shaker. Users of guest equal to new user of Srinivasan. Okay, so here the difference what we are going. Okay, so we have this particular thing, like when we just try to observe this thing. Okay, so questions, I'm getting a lot of questions here, and since I said like I will try to put some time for the questioner to answer all the questions. Just try to concentrate before you get deviated. Okay, so I just have this thing, like the only difference what we find within the decoding is also same, performance is also same. Only the thing is the code readability will be more easier when you work with this particular dictionary initializer concept. Okay, other than that, we don't find much differences in this thing. It's only the code readability, and internally the C sharp compilers handles the particular thing like a method in the previous one, and here it uses a concept like indexes for handling the code. Okay. And along with this particular thing, like C sharp 6.0 mainly concentrated on reducing the code for us. So most of the features what they have introduced us will reduce the code only. Say one of the feature that has been introduced in our C sharp 6.0 is called as event initializers. So you can initialize the events also in our C sharp 6.0. So when we wanted to have it, say for example, if you have a class, okay, say for example, if we have a class, like say a user class, like say user, where I would like to have a property called as a string name, a setter as well as a getter. Once we have this particular thing, say that I wanted to have some kind of event. Okay, so what we can do is I may have some event like say public event, event handler. We'll take the event arguments and I put something like speaking. Some particular thing I have it. So this is a class which a property and a event handler. Now what we can do is when we try to work with this particular concept, we have something called as, let's say I have a main method. We can define a variable. Say for example something like log. I can put a lambda expression where I can just try to handle the definition as per my requirement, something like I said done. Now this is a variable that is available. So event initializers are used for initializing the events at the time of creation of the objects. It is used to initialize the events at the time of creating an object with the support of object initializers. So when we try to go with this particular thing, then we take the support of this. Okay, so what we can do is like when we have this thing, so I have a class called as a user for which I have a variable now called as log, which is having some kind of event handling capabilities. Now, what we can do here in this particular thing is once we have this thing, I can just create an object for this, like say, for example, where user equal to new user name, I can just specify, for example, like shaker. So while creating the object, we have a event called as speaking. Now what I can do is I can simply say plus equal to, I can say log. This particular capability is not available in the earlier version. So what we can do is like when we have this thing, Hello? Is the things is audible? Hello? Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Is the voice is audible? No, event is not completed. Is everyone there? Okay. So there was a small technical problem. Let's try to continue. Okay, this is what the feature that is available for us, which was not available in the previous version. Okay, so when we used to work with this particular thing, okay, so when we had a requirement such that we have things to be initialization has to be done for the events, even that support has been given. This is purely for reducing the number of lines. So this is not going to improvise any kind of performances for us. It's only for the reducing the number of lines of code for us. Okay, but the next feature that has been introduced for us is a feature which will help in improvising the performance also. That is using params with IEnumerable. So we know that when I say params, it is a keyword that we will be using when we wanted to define a method that accepts a list of arguments of same type. Basically, an array, if you wanted to accept as a list of arguments, then we can take the support of this particular thing. Okay, so what we can just do is, like, say, for example, uh, the usage of params was to be something like this. Before C sharp 6.0, what we used to do was voices echoing. I don't know. The same problem for everyone? Is the voices echoing? Okay, so before C sharp 6.0, what we used to do was, if I have a method like, say, public int sum, I can have something like params int an array like numbers. So instead of we define something like array variable, we take the support of param array and we will try to handle this. So what we try to do is, we may take some result equal to 0. We take a for each variable in the numbers. And once we have this thing, I can simply say result plus equal to some number and we return the result. Okay, so we have something called as return result. This is how we used to do it. So what is the problem with this style of doing is, uh, if we use arrays, then it always forces to create a concrete in-memory data structures. Even before the method is being called, it will try to prepare that particular thing, which is not needed. Okay, so the point that we have to understand is, instead of doing like this using C sharp 6.0, what we can do is, we have been introduced with the concept of defining I enumerable things. Like say, I can simply say params I enumerable of type integer numbers. So once it is going to become I enumerable, then what happens is, this works as a lazy. So since it is going to be lazily working, what happens is, when it is needed, it will try to load the things into the memory, and it will try to do the processing. It will not concretely make a data structure in the memory before its usage also. When it is being used, at that time it will prepare the sequence and it will be passed to the processing for us. And since it is a collection, whatever the things we wanted to use it, we can take the support of the collections functionalities, and instead of taking a for each and everything, I can just handle the lambdas type and all. So some is a property that is available, method that is available for enumerable collections. So I'm going to pass each and every parameter of this thing, and it is going to return me the sum of this thing. So instead of writing a code like this, now with the support of C sharp, what we can do is, we can just write the code in this way. This will decrease the number of lines of code, and also this is going to help us in okay, this is also going to help us in improvising the performance. This support was not available for us. Okay, only voices there, screen is not coming. Hello? No, I don't think so. Someone has posted a message like voice is audible but screen is not coming. Is both are visible? Like audible and visible, right? Okay. Chandrakant Balakrishna, uh, is the screen is visible? Okay, okay, fine. So let me just try to continue with this thing. Okay, this is a feature that has been available. Another small Mickey Mouse type of concept that has been added for us here is a concept called as literal support. So what is that particular thing is like, it's for the readability purpose. So whenever we have C sharp 6.0 supports literals. So what is this particular thing is like, say for example, if I have a long variable, like say something like length, I try to define it as a getter. If I just specify this, now I can just try to specify this particular thing like this. I can just specify something like this. So now when I try to provide a value like this, so underscore is a literal that has been available where you can just try to put it. So it becomes more easy for a person to understand this. It's not that you have to put it after three zeros or two zeros or anything. It's for the understanding purpose they have given a support. There's nothing much great about this particular feature. It's only for the code readability. So we can just try to observe it. C sharp 6.0 are targeting on three things. One is to reduce the code. The next one is to provide a good code readability. The third one is your performance also. And one more new feature that has been introduced for us called as declaration expressions. This is an awesome feature provided you know C Sharp properly. Okay, so what is this particular thing is, like in simple, if I wanted to specify this thing, in simple, if I wanted to specify before C Sharp 6.0, if I wanted to use some particular member, I have to first define that member, then I have to use it. For example, let's say that I say decimal, something like say result, and I say decimal dot parse of. Okay, in decimal dot try parse, I try to use it instead of parse. So I say decimal dot try parse. I put a value called a shaker. I know that shaker is not a decimal value, so it will try to give me an error. So we know that when we use try parse, then what happens is we will be collecting that information onto the out mode variable. So what we try to do is first we'll try to define the variable, and when we wanted to use it, at that time we'll try to define the out mode variable here. Okay, at that time we'll try to define the out mode variable. So whereas using C Sharp 6.0, this is not needed. So what I can do here is in our C Sharp 6.0, when you are trying to define this thing, I can simply say decimal dot try parse. I can say shaker, and I say out where result. Means when you are trying to use that particular thing, at that time you can just utilize it. Okay, and at that time we can take the support of this. Okay, we have this option. Okay, so this is what we have to understand. But if I wanted to understand the exact usage of this particular thing, then let's try to understand with a complex scenario, so that we can just do it. For example, let's assume that I have something like a numbers, which is a array of this thing, and we wanted to use this particular thing. So if it is a collection of numbers where we have it, we wanted to do it. Assume that I say list int some numbers equal to new list of int, and you have some numbers. I can say something just to make the thing simple, like say for example, let me say for int I equal to 0, I is less than 100, I plus plus. Assume that this is for adding the numbers, so I can say numbers dot add of I. So we have this particular list of numbers, so we will have a collection of 100 numbers here. So once we have a collection of 100 numbers, I just wanted to get only the odd numbers and the sum of the odd numbers. In order to find the odd numbers, I can say this numbers dot where n goes to n modulus 2 equal to 0 dot to list. I can just again make it as a to list. So we will get the list of odd numbers. Next, what I try to do is I say for each where number in odd, then what we try to do is I can just simply specify some local variable int result equal to 0, and then I say result equal to the number. So we can just try to specify this option in this manner. Okay, so once I have this is how you're going to define this in the previous version. Now using C Sharp 6.0, what you can do is you have a support of declaration expression where you wanted to do it, at that place we can do it. So instead of writing all these things, I can simply say int result equal to 0 for each where number in, again I put where odd equal to numbers dot where n goes to n modulus 2. This is should be equal to 1, right? It's for the odd numbers. So 1 dot modulus. And once we just specified this thing, we can simply say result equal to number. So this entire thing we can just reduce in this way. So wherever you wanted to use that, we can take the support of this and we can just handle this thing. Okay, this is one of the feature that has been added for us. And another feature that is available for us, let's try to understand this feature also quickly so that we can just put a questionnaire for another 15-20 minutes. Okay, the next feature that we have is a concept called as using static. So when I say something like we wanted to use some kind of static members directly, then C# given a support for us. For example, let's say that usually the traditional style of writing the code is we'll say using system, some class, some program, and we will have a static void main, and then we will say console dot write line, something like hello world. I try to write it. A basic program. This is how the program we usually write it. Now from C# 6.0, what we can do is usually we say using namespace hierarchy. But when we work with the static members, and if that particular static consists of some static methods, we can directly say like this. This will not be applicable in the previous version because using statements will always allows you a namespace hierarchy. But whereas here what happens is if the class consists of a static class and if we wanted to use it, then you can directly use that particular thing and we can just access. Now what I can do is I can simply say class program and I can simply say write line. Okay, so I can just simply say from C# 6.0 onwards, what we can do here is we can just handle this particular thing. Okay, so this support was not available earlier. So now what we can do is you can just have the static and work with this. But in case if I have a method itself with a name called as write line. So for example, I say public something called as int write line, which takes a string, some message. And assume that this is going to write some code to find the string length. If that is the case, this write line, what it will do is it will always provide importance for the non-static members only. So it will not assume that it is a write line of console class. It is a write line which is a non-static method. That particular information it will try to take it and it will work. Okay, and in case if I try to use something like this, if the name of the methods are ambiguity and if both the methods are static, assume that if both the methods are static and if the name is ambiguity, then what happens is we will be okay, we will be getting an ambiguity error. In case if both the methods are same and one is a static method and the other one is a non-static method, then it will always take the non-static method as the first preference and then it will try to execute it. Okay, and there is one more powerful feature that has been introduced for us, which is called as conditional access. So it's again a new feature that's been available for us in C Sharp 6.0. Like, what is this particular thing is, when you have a requirement for handling something conditionally, then we can take the support of this thing. Instead of putting multiple if conditions within one more if condition, again if condition, like that, we can take the support of this concept. So conditional access is a thing which has been introduced in C Sharp 6.0 for getting some information conditionally. For example, let's assume that how do we do that means, if I have something like system.io and I have something like using system dot, just a simple thing, threading dot task. Assume that we have this thing. I would like to have a class called test operation log. In case if we have this particular thing, okay, now if I have a method, like say for example, public task, I say log operation action action. Okay, now assume that there is some parameter that has been passed. So I would like to have the information. Now what I can do is I can say action. If the value is available, assign that value to this. In case if the value is not available, action is an object. So that object name dot method value, you take it. In case if that value is not available, then dot name, you take it. In case if that value is also not available, then take a default value as no name, something like this. And I can just return the task from result. Okay, so simple code that's available. Like this is a simple code that's available where we are trying to access the information conditionally. If this value is available, if action is available, then return the action. If the action is not available, then go to the method and return that value. If method is not available, then go to the name and assign that value. Even that value is not available, then go to, then take a default value and assign that particular information. This is how a conditional access support has been provided for us. And along with this, one of the most important feature that has been given in C Sharp 6.0, which we have been waiting eagerly from 5.0 and all. C Sharp 5.0 introduced a concept called as asynchronous programming, where we used to take the support of async and await, and we used to do that particular actions. But what happened is when we try to handle the things, so asynchronous programming, like we can use it everywhere, but when an exception is thrown, we may not able to handle that particular thing. But now what is happening is from C Sharp 6.0, we have been provided with a support for handling the asynchronous programming within the catch block also. So await support within the catch block. This has been introduced in our C Sharp. So for example, if you have a class, for example, instead of a synchronous task, if I say I have an asynchronous task, in case if you're not having an idea on what is asynchronous programming, please make sure that you take the support of a concept called as async and await demo from my YouTube channel. Okay, so public async task log operations and it's always a good practice that whenever you write an asynchronous method, you simply specify async and I say action like this. So now this is going to be an asynchronous task. Assume that instead of writing the things directly, say that we would like to write within the try catch block. So say that we have something like a stream writer where I try to use a log writer, a getter which is going to be equal to a new stream writer of string. Any particular stream that we pass on, we will have this particular details. Assume that we have an object for this thing or a property we have here. Now what I can do is I can just call some action, do some action, say that it may be successful or a failure. If it is successful, what I do is I say log writer dot write line. So log writer is nothing but a property of the stream writer, write line. And whenever you are using asynchronous, you have something like write line. So write line is used for writing the information onto the target stream. And since I'm using async, I'm just using this. So I can simply say some information, whatever we wanted to have here. Okay, so I can say executed successfully. Something. Catch exception ex. Now, whenever we have an error, we will be throwing some particular error. Okay, so I can simply say console.writeLine some error. But I just wanted to I just wanted to display this particular thing onto the right line also. So what I can do is I can say await log writer dot write line parsing and error ex dot message. Now this particular support has been added. So earlier this was not available. Whenever we used to get some particular error, only in a synchronous way we will able to handle it. There is no concept of asynchronous writing that is available under the catch block. But now fortunately we got this particular thing, so we will be able to do the task more simple and easier. I can say flush for storing that information, whether it is success or a failure, whatever it is there, to the target stream, we are trying to store the details. So these are some of the new features that are available for us. Let me just try to give a summary of the features what we discussed now. So we have discussed something called as auto property initializers. We have discussed a concept called as primary constructors, how to use on explicit constructors along with primary constructors. Okay, how to use an primary constructors, we have used this particular things, and then we taken the support of a concept called as uh, dictionary initializers, event initializers that are available for us. And there's one more feature that we discussed, that is params with IEnumerable. We also discussed about a concept called as declaration expressions, literals, and also we just discussed about a concept called as using static, finally await within the catch. These are some of the things that are available for us. Okay, these are some of the things what we just discussed in our webinar. So now you can just try to post your questions so that I can just answer one by one. Balakrishna has posted a question saying that, is it a combination of switch and conditional operator? Yes. Okay, it's a combination of both that is available for us here. Okay. And you can just uh, the next thing is, yeah, we can use only underscores there. Okay. Okay, so you can just ask your queries if anything is there, so that I can just clarify your questions. Any queries to be clarified before we conclude our session? Not all the concepts are experimental stage, Manoj. Okay, uh, some of the concepts are there. Okay, some of the concepts are there which is in experimental stage. Okay, it's only the people have to specify, like whether to keep this kind of features or not. Okay, so one thing which I find very advisable thing is, I was very much impressed with auto property initializer, and the declaration expressions feature, and also I was very much happy with the concept of await within the catch blocks, and using static also, it was quite impressive feature. So any other further queries? Yes, this webinar, maybe I will try to keep it as public webinar, so it will be available on my Google Plus, Mohammed. While defining variable, we used underscore. The underscore is only for the readability. It will take the value what we just provided, Prashant. So any other queries? Auto auto property initially, like the properties which are in experimental primary constructors is an experimental stage, and dictionary initializers are also in experimental stage. The remaining all the things are available from 6.0 onwards, and hopefully this primary constructors will also be available, because this is there in F sharp, and also it is available in the other languages which are newly getting introduced. But the reason for the contradiction is, people, why all the language mixture they wanted to put it in C sharp when the language is neat and clean. So people, because like we have been following a structure for creating a class. If you have observed the syntax of the constructor, primary constructor, it's almost changing the definition how we used to write it. It appears to be like a method. Okay, so it was good if you used to work with the scripting languages like JavaScript or anything like that. But the thing is, it's not efficient for. Okay, it was not efficient for a very structured language like C sharp. So any other doubts? Okay. So all these particular programs are the notes whatever I typed in. I will try to keep this thing in my website shekhartheguru.net, and I want you to give me the next webinar topic and what is the comfortable time. Will like every Saturday at 8 o'clock like this, we'll take some session on some advanced concepts like this. What topic if it is there? I already posted one time back in my Facebook also. I was asking which topics is best for webinar. Again, I'm just asking you what would be the best suggestible topics. You can just put it onto my Facebook, and my Facebook ID is facebook.com/shaker online. And for the videos, you can just try to go to my YouTube channel shaker online for you. And in case if anyone wants to have a training from me, if any of your friends or anyone wants to go for a classroom training or online trainings, they can reach me to my mail ID. And as everyone may be aware that I have came out of peers and I have my own institute and all. The people who wants to learn ASP.NET MVC or other technologies from me, they can always contact me to my mail ID, so that I will try to tell them where is my office address, online trainings or whatever it is, they can just contact me. And what I wanted to have is like give me some topics like say for the next webinar so that people get benefited and all. See, already most of the people are my students who have attended this thing. They have learned C sharp earlier versions, and I don't want them to pay something more for the new upgradations and all. So it's my responsibility to update, so I'm just trying to do it. Give me some topics on for the next webinar. We'll try to plan out and we'll try to take up the session. Okay, so with this, shall we conclude our webinar? So whatever your comments or anything, you can just put it onto my Facebook event page or else on my Facebook page, so that okay, so that it will be there for me to check out also. Or else you can send me a personal mail to my mail ID also, so about your feedbacks or anything, the session what we have just taken as a webinar. Okay, so with this I'll try to stop my session. Before I conclude, any other entity framework? Okay, it will be better if you put it onto my Facebook or send me a mail, so that the topics, it will be easy for us to check out. Okay, design patterns, I'm planning for to provide a free video series, Balakrishna. So 21 patterns, that is what we called as gang of four. All that particular things I will try to do it. Sure. Okay, so with this, I try to stop it itself. We'll continue this thing with the next webinar. I will try to post the webinar details and all for the next one. Okay, Syed, you also attended, huh? Great. Okay, we'll meet at the next webinars. Take care. I'm ending this particular session now.